Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another weekly book chat. I'm Zahra from Collapse Life. I'm joined once again by the lovely Susan from Courageous Conversations, and we are very happy to have you with us. We are spending. oh, Sorry, hold on one second. You can't hear me. Can you hear me? Okay. Sorry, everyone, for the technical difficulties. I hope everyone can hear me. If you are watching and you're having any trouble with the sound, please just pop a note in the comments. Um, and we'll just restart. Really happy to have everyone with us again for our weekly book chat. We started out last week discussing a book by Derrick Broze, How to Opt Out of Technocracy, and we talked about very practical strategies that people can and are using to start to separate from and escape from the technocracy. Hi, Susan. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. I don't know what happened because we were having a chat beforehand and then you were gone. Anyway, I'm
Well,
back and glad to be
great.
back and
Yes.
glad to be with everybody who's joining us. That's great. Couldn't be a better time or worse time, really, could it? In terms of having these conversations about what do we do now?
Yeah. Well, it's very comforting, I think, in uncertain times like this to have others that we can talk to and just compare notes and share experiences and just know that we're not going through this alone. So that's what I really value in having this weekly chat with you and with everyone who joins us around the globe. But particularly, as I was saying, we started out last week talking about Derrick Broze's book. We planned to continue and will continue to talk about it from a more theoretical standpoint this week, but obviously events this weekend have kind of changed the context within which we'll be discussing it. So maybe we should just start there, Susan.
Yeah, and do share your comments and your thoughts. What I really liked about the book, and this part of the book, which is more about the philosophy behind it, it's really about, how do we survive and how do we bring in new ways of organizing ourselves, new politics, new ways of trading, new ways of educating ourselves. And Derrick Broze takes a guy, I think who was very prevalent in the 1970s, a guy called Samuel Konklin III.
Mhm.
And he has a theory, a philosophy called agorism, which I hadn't come across before. I don't know whether you had, Zahra.
No, actually, I hadn't, which, I think a lot of people in the audience might find surprising. But I'm really glad to be exposed to Konklin's work because it's very interesting, and it's really interesting actually to see it in the context of the 1970s when he really started shaping his ideas and comparing it to today. 50, 60 years on, it's a very interesting comparison. Like he wrote. I was reading an anecdote that he wrote about finding a dentist on a weekend in LA and trying to navigate the system. But he was using the yellow pages to look up dentists and their adverts in the yellow pages. So just thinking about a very different world in which he lived when he was kind of shaping these ideas and how we are today. But the anecdote ended with him finding the one and only dentist in the yellow pages in LA who was open on a Sunday. And it turned out that that guy was a complete libertarian. And so he was really sort of jokingly saying this is counter economics in action. We looked in the phone book to find someone, the free market was working because it was the one guy who was like, sure, come on in and see me. He had a little dental practice in his backyard, took his cash and gave him a shot that fixed his toothache. So anyway, just a little aside, but yeah, very, very interesting person, very interesting theories. And just to put it in the context of today in 2026, March 1st, really just the idea that, the world is now at war. Obviously, war is just an accelerant of the sort of collapse that we have been talking about, you on your blog and we on Collapse Life, for several years. And this is now the moment to start putting these things into practice, although it's never too late to begin. But those of us, I think, on this call have been thinking about what we might need to do to prepare for this moment for a while. So anyway.
Yeah, this is very timely, isn't it? Now you can't ignore the fact that the world is going to change, that there are going to be shortages, that it's going to affect us all. And we can't be smug about this, but we can sort of be supportive of other people who are just coming to that realization. We've just had a comment from Pat Brown, says, agorism is well known in permaculture, where fractions of abundance are searched out. That's a lovely way of expressing it. Because one of the things I loved about the idea, and I thought also it's so interesting that he was writing this in the 1970s about how corrupt and dysfunctional and damaging government was. Well, that's even more apparent today, isn't it? And the whole thesis is about free markets, and I liked that. And obviously a lot of the solutions that come up in the collapse world and community is to shop locally, to support free trade and markets and all of those things. But Konklin takes it as a revolutionary act, that it's a way of overthrowing the government. Instead of waiting for things to change, you actively withhold your taxes, you actively seek out your dentist who's going to take cash, or somebody else is going to do that. In the UK, we'd call it like a black economy.
Right.
And I think that's really interesting because it comes up again within digital currencies and using cash. And obviously from Derrick Broze's position with his book this is how we opt out, that we deliberately seek out ways to work around the system, and we do what he calls counter economics, which is outside the system.
Yeah.
Okay. Michael Ginsberg talks about that a little in Pre-Collapsing the System. Yeah, so it's a way of us regaining and being clear about our power, that our money can make changes.
Yeah, and actually, Michael Ginsberg's idea was it was a thought experiment. He wasn't calling on people to do this, but just sort of analyzing what would it look like if people stopped paying their mortgages, and people en masse stopped paying their mortgages and just brought down the banking system in advance of some kind of planned collapse of the financial system anyway, which is what many people in this group feel is coming. They're going to use some excuse to kind of crash the financial system and then bring in the centralized banking, the digital currencies, all of that. So Michael's thought experiment was, what happens if we kind of pull the trigger before that? And that's kind of something that Derrick Broze has actually talked about a little in the book, and actually slightly warned about, in the sense that there should be kind of phases to move towards agorism. It starts out with few people breaking free of the system. And we had great conversations last week from people who were actually already doing that. And then more and more people start joining that counter economy as people start moving away from the statist system that weakens the statist system, because people find the counter economy more attractive, and then it kind of peaks at a final kind of confrontation. But Broze kind of warns that once the state starts to recognize that their authority is declining, they may come out on the attack against people who are opting out and moving towards counter economics. And And so he warns to try and prevent the state from recognizing their own weaknesses until there's a mass movement in the counter economy.
Which is very questionable, isn't it? And I just want to, again, welcome everybody coming in. And great, we've already got contributions. One from Christine, two from Christine. The first one, the hybrid war has been decades in the making. This is just another aspect coming into view. Yeah, they've been planning this for a long time. And it could be the crisis that then brings in the other things that we've talked about, the surveillance increasing and the social credit system. We have a lovely hi all from Witsius. And then Christine again, sadly, even people in freedom selves have never heard of Samuel Edward Konklin III, nor do they care to know. This is the problem. Yeah, this is a problem. And I mean, this is why I welcome these conversations, because we're educating ourselves, aren't we? I'd never heard of him before. And as I said, I think he elevated this whole idea of what we do with our money into a revolutionary act. And it's also very telling that how many people will actually be able to do that, because it made me think of situations in the past, even buying a house where we gave the deposit in cash to the builders, meeting them outside the bank with a bag of money because they were in financial trouble. We got the price down, we could afford the house, and somehow we managed to do that deal. And you wouldn't do it nowadays. Even with tradespeople, most of them don't want cash. They say they can't spend it. They don't have anywhere for it to spend it. So are we able to use our money freely? I mean, that's the other argument, isn't it, of Samuel, is that when you have government, because the other thing I didn't realize, and I've heard bandied about Austrian economics, and this is my very simple view of it, whereas Marx thought that the value of production was in its cost, and the Austrian economists think it's in the value that is perceived by the people who want it. And so therefore, they use this as the argument, is that we should be free to choose, and that the government steps in and manipulates and limits our choices and taxes our choices, and therefore we are not free to choose, and therefore the government is detrimental to our well-being. Surprise, surprise. So some more comments. I don't know if you want to take them.
Yeah, there's a great comment from the word herder who says, I think regardless of currency, we're going to need food, and that seems to be a target. And they add, we already have central banking, don't we? I think the idea of food is a really critical one, and it would be great to maybe pause and drill down on that piece of it a little bit, because obviously food and water, without them, we cannot survive. And there are actually movements to try and limit people growing food in their own backyards. I know in certain countries, and even water, actually, in certain states around the United States, there are limits to even rainwater catchment. There are regulations around putting a barrel under your eaves and trying to capture your own water, because there are downstream effects. They say that if you capture too much water off of your own roof, it might affect the water table and the riparian systems downstream from you. I mean, it seems to me that seems to be a huge overreach, but it's really important for people to look into what that looks like in their own local environment. But also, I think this really ties back to the idea that Konklin says that when rules are arbitrary and immoral, the right thing to do is to break those rules. And that's kind of the underpinning of the idea of counter economics.
Which we then bring into how many people would be willing to do that. And a few more comments. So even if you own your house, this is from Witsius, even if you own your own house, if you default on the taxes, you lose it. Yeah, this is it. Nothing. We own nothing. And this is what we want, isn't it? Klaus Schwab 2030. This is where we're heading. And food is critical. You can't even buy it with gold. Interestingly, though, I just read an article this afternoon by a local farmer, and I've been trying to track him down because he was saying about silver and gold and small denomination silver coins to be able to buy things. And I live in a rural community, and we have a flea market every Friday, and somebody sells meat. I've already had a conversation with him about using silver or barter because food supplies and that access to people who are able to bring food to us is going to be imperative going forwards. Really important.
Yeah. Whitsius says barter is best. And I think, Susan, you're having those conversations with people in your local environment is exactly the right thing to do. And it's exactly what Derrick wrote about in the book as well. He says education first, then mass noncompliance. You can't jump directly to the idea that everybody is going to opt out of the system and start breaking rules right away. It has to come incrementally through education and through leading by example, by actually doing the things that you believe in and showing people that it can be done. He says there must be an understanding of the power of noncompliance, and you can do that by actually living it and showing people that there are options. I think a lot of people are starting to feel as though there are fewer and fewer options, and this is really a decision moment. I think, and what Derrick wrote in the book, you have a decision to make. You can submit, you can opt out, or you can do nothing. But he says never surrender. So I think, we had such great comments last week from people who are opting out and showing that it can be done. And I think we just need more and more of those examples. I know when you opt out, you also feel probably a little bit hesitant to shout it out to the world because you don't want to draw attention to yourself. So it's sort of a subtle and quiet education, softening, showing examples like what you're doing with your local flea market and just talking to people about alternatives.
Yeah, it's a real big dilemma, isn't it? Because if you don't actually say this is what I'm doing and I'm prepared to do, then other people don't have the courage to also come along, and that's what we need. And it's great. We're having some great comments this week as well. Pat Brown, a few comments from her and contributions, weighs in North Dakota's state bank is very clever. New York's Ithaca dollars and time banking are essential. Time banking, that's a concept that I've come across, and that was tried locally and did work for quite a while, but ran into trouble. And also we had the sort of Totnes pound, the Bristol pound. All of those have now gone. Just when you need them, they have disappeared. Eggs are water units, so water turns into currency. My 11K catchment is IBC, 250 gallons each, cobbled DIY to stay out of sight. Yeah, isn't it sad that you can't, sad and scary that you can't actually save water? I read that somebody had been sent to prison for having water butts because they were stopping the state having access to that water.
Right.
The word herder continues. The response to people who understand about vaccine is to train us to shut up.
Oh, there's a previous comment from the word herder said, I think the bad guys don't realize that their attack on us is going to bring us together in a big, big way. I think that's a great comment.
Yeah, and I going back to what you were saying earlier, I think when times get even tougher, people get really creative, and I think there will be more of a market. I mean, there's stories from the Second World War in the UK, how people used to keep a pig in their back garden, or they had a deal with the black marketeer who worked locally and knew all the fixes and where to get things, and And I think they had that. We talked about the Dmitry Orlov book the other week about having fixers, people who knew ways around the system. So this is a common theme, isn't it, about what we need to do, because the system isn't working for us. The system doesn't support us. And now it's taken us to war. I had some sort of moral dilemmas, because I was actually brought up to believe that it was ethical and moral to pay your taxes, because you were contributing to roads, to hospitals, to education, and withholding your taxes made you a bad person.
And that may have been true at one point, but now, with corruption being as rife as it is, and with infrastructure breaking down to the point that it is, it is a question. If you live in a jurisdiction where you feel your taxes are contributing to your own well-being, so that's great. Then keep paying your taxes. And there is a sort of biblical concept of render to Caesar what is Caesar's. You have to maybe you have to draw your own line, I guess. The idea that property taxes, if without paying your property taxes, your land can be seized, is a very frightening one, because it does start to feel as though opting out it has its limits. You can only do it to a point. I want to make sure that we get all the comments that are coming in, because there's a great conversation going on the YouTube side. Deepwater One says they're going to do everything possible not to be able to exist outside their system, which is absolutely true. But it also goes back to the idea that, we cannot live in fear, because then we get paralyzed and we basically decide to submit. And I think there has to be ways to figure out how to ethically opt out of the system without causing harm. Christine is responding to Witzius, saying freedom cells aren't hard to find. Just keep your expectations in check. I found it thick with feds and people who are not informed. However, I did make one worthy friend, at least. So freedom cells it's a network, I think, that Derrick Broze was instrumental in setting up. And there's a website where you can look in your local area for others that you can connect with who are doing intentional communities, or they're doing homeschooling, whatever these alternative lifestyles may be. And you can find others in your area and connect with them, or broadcast the kinds of efforts that you may be making. I did try and look in our local area. There isn't too much going on, but I think, Christine, you're wise to think that you have to be a little skeptical as well, because this is the internet, and anyone could say that they are who they are, and actually be, as you say, feds just checking out who's in the freedom cell.
Yeah, that's really hard, isn't it? It's full of people who are suspect, and this is all part of it, isn't it? About who do you trust, and making us feel isolated, because our main power is en masse, isn't it? To do something en masse civil disobedience. And there are historic examples of people who've done that. And, I've heard more people speaking about that recently, or writing about it in articles, as civil disobedience to sabotage, because we're not going to be able to fight the system head on, are we? They'll always use more violence. And that's the other thing I liked about this theory and philosophy, is it's really based on non-violence. Absolutely. And that's one of the main arguments against supporting the state, that it is violent and abusive. Yeah. So some more comments. What happens when they ration fuel and you will need carbon credits, digital ID, and CBDCs to buy gas? Yeah, exactly. I can't help but think this is going to be coming down the pipe very quickly, based on that they will be bringing rationing in. It seems like the perfect storm, doesn't it, to bring in all the things that they've been planning. Yeah, we still need to create parallel systems. Yeah, I taking the example of the Russians. They were in oppressive communist systems.
Very
for many
resourceful, though.
very resourceful, and
Mm.
you know, that's what we have to learn to be, and to expect to be creative.
Yeah.
Yeah, Witzia says rationing will come, and also we also homeschooled and private schooled our kiddies. Private school was even compromised. Yeah, that is the whole argument, isn't it? And that's the other way in which I personally have changed. Is I always thought education was king and key, and now I just see what's happening in our schools. And my daughter worked in a school for a while. It's just indoctrination, and it's not actually helping children flourish. The health system is not making people healthy, it's keeping them sick. You know, that's where we come back to the food issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
About they want us to be eating the food that they manufacture from their corporations, not to have the freedom to make our own food, and to buy from the people that we choose to buy from. And it's all under attack. We are at war. It's
I
not
think
just a war that's being fought with other countries, it's against their own people, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think just on that point, there's a great comment from Word Herder that says resistance is not futile. I think that's just a really important one to remember as we have this conversation, because we are under attack on so many levels, but we do still have a lot more power than we give ourselves credit for. This is something that we talk about on a regular basis. And just kind of going back to the food area for a second, I think there's some really great inspiration coming out of the food movement, the food freedom movement. And you only have to look at Joel Salatin and his writing and his organizations. He does something called the Rogue Food Conference, and he brings together people who are finding creative ways to get food to consumers who want it. So ranchers, farmers, people setting up small enterprises. And in spite of all the restrictions, they're still finding ways to do it. So you can do herd shares. You can find ways to get raw milk, even though it's highly restricted in many states in this country. One creative idea that he mentioned, that Joel Salatin mentioned at a Rogue Food Conference, was a farm hosted a series of educational classes. And so you would sign up and go to, let's say, a butchering class, and the educational materials that they provided to you when you signed up for the class was the butchered meat. So it's just a creative way of getting around what seem like otherwise inane regulations. Rules that just don't make sense exist to be broken. And perhaps maybe in future, we can actually look at some of Joel Salatin's books, and one in particular that he wrote, which is called Everything I Want to Do is Illegal. But he has long advocated for finding ways around rules that are immoral, essentially. So I think it's a really interesting dovetail to the conversation that we're having right now.
Yeah, and let's put the link in for people, because I've not come across that one, and I love the title of his book. Yeah, Word Herder says education is key. It's not education that we're being given.
That's correct, yeah.
And the other one I like, going back to resistance is not futile. I've come across somebody who writes on Substack. I think they've got a podcast saying resistance is fertile.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, which I like.
Witzius on YouTube says resistance rules. Resistance is the only thing we have, Christine says, and the only thing required. So I love it. I love the revolutionary spirit that's coming out in this conversation, because it's great. You know, I think just going back to the idea that you said, Konklin was all about non-violent resistance. So, you know, we can be revolutionary in our actions without advocating for violence. And it's just standing up for and living the life that you want to live, the one that's right for you. I think this is really, really important, and it takes courage. And, you know, having these conversations together we can share our own ideas, we can help each other out, and also just kind of share the courage that we need to be able to really exit and build.
Yeah, and this is a lovely one as well. I mean, yeah, it's quite inspiring, isn't it? And I think one of the things about this community and these conversations is that we're not powerless and that we're not alone. And Word Herder says it all seems very threatening on paper. Yeah, they deliberately want to scare us, and that's part of the motive, to make us comply and be subservient. But there's no way the nasties, as she calls them, can control 5 billion people.
That's
Yeah,
exactly
its
right.
system is going to fail. And you know, even though we might not be able to take them head on, we can make it difficult for them. We cannot line up and sign up before we need to. We can just be awkward and hang back, as you know, to all these sort of different measures as much as we can, and find other people who also think like us. We're never going to be the majority. The majority of people are just going to sleepwalk into this, and we aren't going to convert them. But we have to draw strength from those who see through the mask, see what's actually going on, and are making conscious choices in their lives. And that's what's so great about this. So Pat Brown says, on resistance, before no mixed emotions, sovereignty is paramount. Yeah, exactly. This is what we're talking about now. Now I have Iranian expat friends who tell me that it's gotten so bad that many are celebrating being attacked. Well, this is partly what they wanted, wasn't it? This is the other thing that's going on, that sanctions starved people into submission. And that it just shows us that there are no limits to the cruelty of what they'll actually do and how they will push people into a corner. And we need to remember that, because it will be happening to us at some date in the future, undoubtedly.
Yeah, it's you know, the real question is, how much are you personally willing to risk to step out of living in the technocracy? And you know, we will all have these moments. If everyone around you is opting in and you're opting out, you're going to face social exclusion. People are going to avoid you because if there's a social credit score attached to their own ability to move through life, they're going to stay away from you because you're going to be a limit on their score. And if we live in fear, then that becomes part of the enforcement mechanism. And we will probably make poor choices if we're living in fear. So, you know, I think we all really have to ask ourselves, how much are we willing to risk? And I think that goes back to what I think it was Pat who just said, you know, sovereignty is paramount. If we put that as the top priority, then that's where you start making those decisions. And you know, this goes back to conversations that we've been having over the past couple of weeks, just talking about travel and the things that were necessary in order to do international travel. And very soon, you know, the decision will be, do you want to opt in and share your social media history or whatever other intrusive personal details they might ask, or will you just say, no, I just won't travel, that's it, you know, I'm done, I will not get on a plane, I will not go to an airport. Tough choices, because we never thought that these are the kinds of things that we would have to choose, but this is where we're at. Yeah.
Yeah, and making those decisions. Lots more contributions coming in. That's great, and keep them coming. Christine says, oh no, Whittier says, we need a spiritual revolution. This is
That's
true.
right.
It's a spiritual question, isn't it? It's about, how do I choose to live? Who do I choose to be? And what do I morally support? You know, with my energy, with my attention, with my money. These are really deep spiritual questions about how we live now. Unfortunately, back to the land, Whittier says, unfortunately, they will suss us out and quash our discompliance. Yeah, this is the thing. But the more of us who are doing that, and the more of us who model that and show courage, the more difficult it will be. Christine says, prepare yourself. Most people around us are going to succumb to their decisions. So be it. So be it. Freedom will cut both ways, but we will be burdened by witnessing it. Yeah, it's going to be tough. It's going to be hard. And I think when we see, as we did do in the pandemic, not only did people succumb, but they were willing to report other people and turn them in. And, this is quite scary, that it'll be our neighbours that the people that we need to be careful around. So we need to be prepared for that. Deepwater says idea to travel is electric bicycle and solar generator to charge your batteries. Yeah, I think that's going to be my sort of travel in the future.
Yeah. This goes back to the idea of, there are a lot of people in this community, I'll call it, who are still at a moment thinking, where should I go? Am I in the right place now? Or is there somewhere else that I should go? If I live in a city, should I move to the country? That kind of thing. And the transportation question is a really important one. So, one of my reflections on my trip to England and Ireland is that there are still many places in the UK that are very walkable or bikeable. And that exists, of course, in cities, but also outside of cities, in smaller towns. You can still manage to get around and do a lot of what you need to do on foot or on a bicycle. I don't know, Susan, now you live in rural UK, so you might have a different view, and please correct me if you think I'm wrong, but it may be because of the very long-standing tradition in the UK of villages connected by market towns that is something that is maybe unique to the United Kingdom?
I don't know if it's unique, because I think people all over the world live in small communities and villages, and that's how we used to live. Cities are relatively new en masse that they are now. I mean, obviously there were cities. And in terms of where you should be, I have a very strong opinion that life is going to be particularly tough in cities because of the food supply mostly, but also just the sheer volume of people who are going to be out looking for food. And this is another thing that's worth saying, that even if you can't stock up lots of food, at least store enough for a week or two. Because if it really gets tough and difficult, and like we saw in the pandemic when shops just emptied and people were fighting over toilet paper, if you have enough just to keep going for a couple of weeks, you can stay out of the mayhem until it actually settles down a little bit, and other ways to supply hopefully will come in, because the worst thing is going to be the shock and the panic that happens. And I think that's one of the ways in which we are resilient, because we've been thinking about this. Let's have a look at some more contribution.
There's some great comments. Sorry to interrupt you. There was just there's been some great comments from the word herder, and please keep them coming. We love it. First of all, here she said the best weapon the nasties have is mind effery. But beyond that, there's even two other weapons that they say: fear and divide and conquer, the two best weapons the bad guys have. And then they add that, again, this is about spiritual, not religious. So this is going back to a comment that somebody else made about we need spiritual. This is spiritual warfare. I think I can't remember the exact phrasing, but I think word herder's making a very important distinction between spiritual and religious. The religion thing, they say, is very divisive. So yeah, a really good point there. And sorry, Susan, I think you were going to read some more comments, so please go ahead.
Yeah, I will. And yeah, there's to me, religion is all part of the old systems of corruption.
Mind
so
effery.
Very different from being spiritual and being moral and ethical. Word herder again. Fear and divide and conquer, the two best weapons the bad guys have. Yeah, sorry, you read that out. Read about the French resistance. Yeah, lots of stories from previous wars and things when we don't have to shout out on the rooftops that we're rebelling. No, we don't. That's the whole thing, isn't it? We can just quietly be in the background. And that's the whole thing about Konklin's counter economics. They are alternative systems from the mainstream. So they're and also he would say, we will deal with people who are illegal, people who are trading in things which are against the law, anything that's part of a totally free market. So it's a much more open system. And here we have Rachel Wild saying, how much time do you think we have left to create viable alternatives to survive and thrive outside the mainstream? Sorry, I'm late to the conversation. And don't know if you've mentioned AI and the timeline and implications of that. How much time? I think we can start, and alternative systems already exist. We just need to support them. And I think more will come in because we're creative as human beings. That's the thing. That's how our ancestors survived. They found ways round, and that's what we've got to do, and be prepared to do that and spot opportunities and make decisions about whether to support something or not, whether we trust people or not. It's going to be tough. We can't just drift along anymore. The world's changing.
I think you just made a really important point, which is that a lot already exists, and all we need to do is focus our attention on it and support it, and let people who are already building that parallel system know that they have a market ready to support them. Some people, we do still need to create at the same time, but a lot of it is just recognizing what already exists and choosing where you put your resources, your time, and your money. So I think that's just a really important point to make. And it's funny how very small choices can actually be seen as kind of huge hits to the system. So I just want to read this one comment from Deepwater One, who says, I have an electric recumbent trike that has a 75-mile range, and I live close to a 100-mile paved bike trail that goes through 8 small towns. So already, creating a plan B for if and when you cannot get around by car, or if fuel becomes completely off limits, which is a very real possibility now. Deepwater One has a plan in place, and I think if we, as you say, if we all just kind of use our creative minds, we can all figure out some way to mitigate for those things that we haven't yet planned for. There's got to be a way. There's always going to be a way. Human ingenuity knows no bounds, I think. And it's sometimes when we're really pushed to the wall that we start thinking about, oh, there is a way out. And we just haven't been pushed there just yet.
And if, going back to Rachel's point, how much time we've got, none of us know, this weekend, it could be game over for all of us in terms of the stakes have just gone so much higher. But we mustn't let that deter us. And if something doesn't exist, then start it or do something. One of the things in reading the book and researching it was really about having things such as nothing is wasted, mutual aid, having exchanges of things that you no longer need, or tool sharing, anything that will help this. And who knows where it will go, and it's bound to put you in touch with people that you wouldn't normally meet and talk to them about what's going on. And all of it is about networking and is contributing to this counter economics that Derrick Broze thinks is the solution. And I think most people always say about community and local. I think he's just taking it to another level, that we could actually cause a revolution that would be the downfall of the old systems, the corruption and governments that are not there to serve the people, and an opportunity to bring in new ways of living, and not returning to being normal, because it is detrimental. So it's not a bad thing that this is happening now. We've just got to see it as an opportunity for us to bring in different ways of living.
Mm-hmm. Should we go back to some of the great comments? And thank you, everybody, for this great participation. We just love hearing all your ideas and your thoughts and great humor. Blaine's Tube said, I've read that a good Australian shepherd can control a flock of 80 or more sheep, now doing the math on 5 billion people. Witzius made a really good point on YouTube. Our neighbors will squeal on us. Which I think is a really important factor to consider in terms of your preparations. Are you living amongst people who will let you live and let live? So if you are doing things that are counter economical, will they just turn a blind eye to it, or will they get on the phone and call the authorities on you? That's I think a really important question to ask yourself, and a really important one to prepare against. It is definitely something that my husband and I took into consideration when we decided to make a move. And it's a hard one to reckon with, but it's really important. If you do have neighbors who are going to squeal on you again and again, you're going to be a sitting duck.
It's about talking to them, isn't it? It's about talking about why you're doing it and what's going on, and hopefully convince them. But it's going to happen, isn't it? It's going to be like that. Christine says they have two critical weapons: early life trauma, setting up blind compliance and programmability, and false belief systems based on emotions and societal cohesion. Everything is downstream from there. Yeah, we are so conditioned, and I think this is part of what's going on, and that's what's so great about this conversation and all the contributions, is we're people who the spell has been broken. And I certainly know from the experiences and things that I've done, I've even questioned why we even need government anymore. It's made me much more radical because of what I've experienced firsthand. So we have Derrick Broze's sus. I don't know if that means suspect or good. I don't have.
I think it means suspect, and fair point. I think it's important for us to mention that just because we're talking about a book on Book Chat doesn't mean that we are all in on everything that the author has ever done or said in their lives. We are here to critique and to take what works, and to not focus too much on things that don't work. And actually, there's a really good related point here from Gavin Mounsey, who writes an amazing Substack out of Canada. He said, I had a few criticisms of Broze's book pertaining to the emphasis on cryptocurrency and technology. But in general, I really appreciate Derrick Broze's work, especially his Conscious Agora project. So thanks for that, Gavin. And yeah, absolutely. Everybody is the whole idea of personal sovereignty and liberty is that everybody is free to choose to believe what they believe and follow their own path. And so, we don't all have to agree with everything that everybody says, because that's exactly counter to the whole idea here. So, maybe Derrick Broze and many other people feel that cryptocurrency is a really critical piece to paving a path towards freedom. And maybe other people feel like it is an absolute scam and nowhere where you would want to put your mental energy or attention. Fair enough. All valid points. Yeah, go ahead.
And sorry, I was just going to say, and it's timing, isn't it? Because the book's a few years old now. And I remember I came across cryptocurrency as it was going to be, again, it was going to be a counter economics method of freedom. And now it's all coming out that Epstein had ties to it, about how they manipulate it. So we've got to remember that things are written and said in context. And yeah, that might not be the route that we would want to go down about using cryptocurrency, because cash is king. And if we can keep it going as long as possible, that will really help. Word herder again, we do well to keep a positive outlook too. Yeah, it's really, really important. There's no reason not to. They add, seems to me that there will likely be more than one kind of currency going around. We just keep it out of the government. Yeah, there'll be lots of different types of currency. Some of it might be skills, some of it might be goods. In 2008, we bought a load of alcohol thinking we would trade that.
Yeah. I mean, being a bootlegger is part of being part of the counter economy. We have a friend who used to live down the road from us, who that was his part of his plan, was to be a bootlegger, to make moonshine and have that as something that he would be able to barter with. And I think that is a brilliant idea. And by the way, it was very good as well. Jason says there are goldbacks that can be used in place of Fed Reserve notes. Many smaller companies are using these instead of dollars. Goldbacks have gold printed into the note with different amounts. And so, yeah, there are going to be a number of different ways for trading, whether it's actual currencies like goldbacks, whether it's gold and silver, or whether it's just something that a very small local community decides has value and they start trading those. It might be tinned beans. Who knows? It could be, it's just trading value for something else, isn't it? And what that is could be any number of things. And, we are of the same mind that that the cryptocurrencies are potentially a bit of a honeypot. But when they were first introduced, perhaps there was a very different ethos to them, and how they've been co-opted or turned into a tool for advancing the technocratic future may be very different from what it was originally intended for. So I think it's just another idea that, we have to stay flexible and not invest too much in a particular outcome, because things are changing so fast.
Yeah, there's lots of comments coming through about bootleggers rule, Bitcoin is shite, and Deepwater. We only have to outlast the collapse of the technocracy from a supply shock systems breakdown and high cost of resources. Yeah, there is that view, isn't there, that we're just got to outlast the chaos, but we do have to have something in place. Because nature abhors a void. And I think that's Derrick Broze's argument as well, that, Samuel Konklin gives us this framework by which we can trade and live and organize ourselves. And it's a great conversation. I think we have to going to bring it to a close in a little while. Blaine's tube, cash is king as long as the government that issued the paperbacks of it allows it to be used. Flashback India, yeah, we've mentioned this before. 2016, 501,000 notes became worthless. Yeah, they can change it overnight. And this is what we need to be prepared for. Christine again comes in and says, I taught myself how to raise and process my own meat rabbits in 2020 for barter and trade. Good for you, Christine. No one cared. 6 years later, they still don't care. Yeah, but they'll be sad when you're eating rabbit and they don't have any. Doesn't help that my track and trace neighbor is a vegan. The vegans are going to be the first ones to fold, I think, Christine, because they won't be able to get their soy lattes. Anyway.
Pat has a comment about just going back to the idea that, you have to choose your neighbors, or at least kind of work within the constraints that your neighbors may pose. Pat is sharing her experience. She says, my neighbor who built his double shed, 200 square feet, unpermitted space, 6 inches from the property line, called in the code compliance for my 34 feet, but where a friend spent 3 nights through the month with her dog. He's a bully. I will paint bus psychedelic and hidden symbols. I will paint the bus with psychedelic and hidden symbols. So, yeah, I mean, it just goes to show, and it actually having a difficult neighbor can take up a lot of your time and your emotional energy. And so, if you do find yourself in one of those situations, the best way is to just find some way to just live together, because you don't want to have to spend all that energy battling your neighbor when there's so many other things that need to get done. Just going back to Gavin Mounsey says, Derrick is an honest guy, in my opinion. He may be more into depending on tech than me, but I think he's also trying to create real communities with regenerative roots. I have not seen him bully in my experience. And then Gavin continues, I just wrote about how maple trees can allow you to make your own alcohol and how that empowers you to preserve herbal medicine via tinctures. So alcohol is empowering on a DIY scale in several ways. And he then says, yeah, it's an amazing, and obviously Gavin is in Canada, and Canada is full of maple trees, and they provide so much to us. But I think the idea that making your own alcohol is more than just having alcohol that you can drink yourself or trade with somebody else, but that it has an important role in building your own apothecary at home. I think it's really important.
Yeah, I did workshops on that once.
Did you? Wow.
Yeah, with herbal plants and just making tinctures. And, this is another area, isn't it, about where we withdraw from the system and we create our own health systems and skill ourselves up and therefore can contribute. Fantastic comments and conversation. It's been really lively. This topic is obviously very relevant.
Yeah,
and
we love
so
it.
many
Thanks.
good ideas. Yeah, we love you all, and thank you very much for all of them. I don't know if there's any sort of closing things people want to say as we draw to a close.
We do have a few comments that haven't been shared, so let's just maybe at least go through what we have. Just finishing with what Gavin wrote pertaining to forms of currency, I explored my perception on what we define as true wealth and seeing heirloom seeds as living currency. I think that's brilliant. One thing I will also say that's positive about Derrick Broze is that he is one of the only anarchists or voluntarists I know that explicitly talks about the need for a moral imperative based in biocentrism, respecting ecology. So great thoughts there. Thank you so much, Gavin, for joining us. I know you have lots going on, and so it's great to have you join us this week. And then just over on the YouTube side, just a great little back and forth between people who are watching. So thanks so much, Witsius and Christine and Deepwater One. Deepwater One says vodka, tobacco, and ammo will be best items for trading and bartering. And Christine says alcohol is fuel and a component of health remedies, and that's why they don't want you distilling it. Yeah, absolutely. Which is more the reason why we should all either do it ourselves or find someone who's doing it and support them. So yeah, this has just been a wonderful conversation, always inspiring, even though we're talking about very serious and could be potentially depressing topics. It's always I always feel good after having a conversation with this community because everybody has great ideas and very willing to share them. So love that. Thank you guys so much. Susan, any final thoughts?
No, just appreciation for everybody who's turned up, pitched in, and had something to say. It all helps, it all supports, it educates us all, and really appreciate you all. And we'll see you next week. We've got a new book. Shall I talk about it, or do you want to, Zahra?
No, you please do, yeah.
It's called The Fourth Turning, is now, and Nigel Howe, I've just got it.
Neil
Howe, thank you. I listened to a talk about it. I thought it sounded great. It puts what's happening now into a wider context, because one of the things that I'm recognizing is that when other people have gone through tough times, they've had like a container, like religion or an understanding that we're going to war to fight this battle, or we're doing this because of austerity, or some reasoning, some larger container to hold them. And we don't have that. It's come up in tonight's conversation about the difference between spirituality and religion. So the Fourth Turning is a framework to look at historical arcs of change and where we are now and what will happen next. So it's more of a prediction as well as an understanding. So that's where we're going next week.
I think it helps us to see that we're not living in isolation. This is something that that happens in cycles, and we are just living through a modern day cycle that has happened many, many times before. And I think the book that you're referring to is an update. So The Fourth Turning is a book that Neil Howe co-wrote with, I believe, William Strauss a few years ago, explaining this idea of generational cycles. And I think, Susan, what you're suggesting that we read and discuss is a newer update. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. Sorry, I didn't have the information in front of me, but I think it's called The Fourth Turning is Now.
Great.
And what they predicted. So I'm looking forward to diving into it. You don't have to read it to take part in the conversation. As you probably gathered, these are some general themes. They are just prompts to get us off. And yes, thank you again. And Christine, I bet you were glad that I missed last week's live stream. Not at all. We missed you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're all appreciated. And I look forward to being with you next week and with you, Zahra.
Likewise. Thanks, Susan. And thanks everyone for the great and lively conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.